He only wanted his daughter to see the clouds from up close. But when they sat in the wrong first-class seat, everything changed. The woman they accidentally offended. She didn't just own the seat, she owned the entire airline. And what happened next? No one could have predicted. If stories like this move you, stories about kindness, second chances, and unexpected love, make sure you subscribe so you never miss a moment that might just stay with you long after the story ends. Now let's begin. The airport terminal was humming with voices and rolling luggage, but Jack Reynolds barely heard any of it. His eyes were fixed on his daughter Sophie as she stood at the window, her small hand pressed against the glass. Outside, planes glided across the tarmac like slow-moving whales in a gray sea. "Do you think the clouds are soft, Daddy?" Sophie asked, her voice a quiet bubble in the chaos of Gate C-12. Jack smiled and walked up behind her. "I think they're the softest thing you'll never be able to touch." Sophie nodded, as if that made perfect sense. She was 8, wearing a pink fleece jacket that still smelled like the dryer sheets from their old apartment. Jack, in his faded navy coat and worn jeans, carried a duffel bag that had seen too many deployments and not enough peace. They were heading home to Colorado after Jack's HVAC contract in Houston ended early. No severance, no thank you. Just a handshake and a final paycheck that didn't even cover rent. So he cashed in his reward. Miles packed up what little they had and promised Sophie they'd be back in Grandma June's house before the weekend snow came. But he didn't expect the mix-up at the gate. Mr. Reynolds, the gate agent, called out, her brow furrowed as she stared at the screen. "Looks like you've been upgraded. You and your daughter are in 1A and 1B. Jack blinked. "Ma'am, we booked economy." The agent shook her head. "It says here complimentary upgrade. You're in first class today. Lucky day, huh?" He hesitated, suspicious, but Sophie was already tugging at his sleeve. "First class," she whispered, eyes wide. "Like, with the little cups and warm towels?" He smiled. "Yeah, like that." Minutes later, they stepped into the cabin, greeted by plush leather seats and soft golden lighting. Jack helped Sophie into her seat, her legs barely reaching the floor. He glanced around, uncertain, as other passengers boarded behind them. Something about this felt wrong, and that's when she appeared. A woman in a tailored charcoal coat stepped into the aisle phone, tucked to her ear, voice clipped and controlled. "Yes, but if they push the merger again, I walk. I'm not here to babysit a boardroom full of—" She stopped mid-sentence, eyes narrowing at the sight of them. Her seat. Jack saw it instantly in her expression. She was supposed to be in 1A. Jack rose immediately. "Ma'am, I think there's been a mistake." "We were." But before he could finish, Sophie turned to her, her voice breaking into the tension like sunlight through a storm cloud. "Is this the seat that's closest to the sky?" The woman blinked. Sophie continued, serious now. "Because I want Mommy to see me. She's up there." For a second, the noise of the plane, the footsteps, the announcements, everything stopped. Jack looked down, caught off guard. Even he hadn't expected that. The woman looked at Sophie as if she were trying to understand a language she hadn't heard in years. Jack stepped in. "I'm so sorry. We'll move right away. It was a computer error. I never meant to." But the woman raised a hand, silencing him gently. "Stay," she said. Her voice, though calm, carried a weight that made people obey. Jack stared. "Excuse me." "You're fine where you are," she said, and took the seat across the aisle 1C, the one usually empty unless someone paid double for it. Sophie beamed. "Thank you, airplane lady." A smile tugged at the woman's lips. Barely there, almost an accident. She turned to face the window, her phone now off. Her eyes weren't on the skyline, they were on her own reflection. And something in that reflection seemed to crack ever so slightly. As the plane took off, Sophie leaned against her father's shoulder and whispered, "She looks lonely, Daddy." like she forgot how to smile. Jack didn't answer, because deep down he'd seen it too. And what he didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that the woman sitting just one seat away wasn't just any passenger. She was Eleanor Tate, CEO of Skypath Airlines, owner of every plane in the fleet, including the one they were riding in now. And for the first time in a very long while, she didn't feel like flying alone. Eleanor Tate stood alone at the baggage carousel, her sleek gray carry-on already in hand, but she wasn't in a hurry to leave. Travelers crowded around, jostling for bags, phone calls, and direction. But Eleanor remained still, like the calm eye of a very quiet storm. The little girl's voice echoed in her mind. "Is this the seat that's closest to the sky? Because I want Mommy to see me." She didn't know why it had hit her so hard. She had heard thousands of sentimental things in airports, farewell speeches, tearful reunions, even children crying for their mothers. But something about the girl's sincerity, the way her father looked so helpless, yet grounded, struck a nerve long buried. A voice interrupted her thoughts. "Ms. Tate, your car's ready." It was Alan, her driver, always punctual, always professional. Eleanor nodded but didn't move. "Get me everything you can on a Jack Reynolds, mid-30s, traveling with an 8-year-old girl named Sophie. Seat 1A, departed from Houston, heading to Denver, I believe." Alan hesitated. "Do you want that done discreetly?" Her gaze didn't shift. "Always." She didn't know what exactly she was looking for. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe in some strange way it was gratitude. She only knew one thing for certain. This man wasn't like most passengers who accidentally sat in first class. He hadn't postured, hadn't tried to take advantage. He stood up immediately, ready to correct the mistake. Shoulders straight, eyes steady. It was the girl who broke the rules. And Eleanor had let her. Back at the Skypath Executive Tower in New York City, the skyline glittered beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. Eleanor sat at her desk, sipping black coffee, though it had long gone cold. Her office was sterile, clean, elegant, cold, like a luxury waiting room that no one ever wanted to wait in. Framed credentials from Ivy League schools, awards for fastest growth airline 5 years in a row. The kind of space where vulnerability had no place. But today she left her laptop untouched. Her thoughts drifted again to Sophie, to Jack, to the silence between them that didn't feel empty. She opened her drawer and took out an old, worn photograph, a girl no older than Sophie sitting on a swing, hair wild from the wind, a mother standing behind her, arms out about to push. Her mother had died before she turned 10. Cancer. Quick, brutal final. Her father had remarried 2 months later. A woman who cared more about boarding school applications than bedtime stories. Eleanor learned early success was safer than softness. Control was better than crying. That's why she built empires. That's why she never sat in 1A unless she absolutely had to. Alan returned later that afternoon, folder in hand. Jack Reynolds, he began. Former Air Force, 9 years. Maintenance and Engineering Division. Honorably discharged. Worked several contractor jobs post-military. Recently let go from an HVAC company in Houston. Currently headed to live with an elderly relative outside Boulder, Colorado. Criminal record, she asked without looking up. Clean, Alan replied. No debt. No civil lawsuits. No strange affiliations. Just a normal guy, it seems. Eleanor raised a brow. That's what makes him interesting. She leafed through the file, slowly pausing on a photo of him in uniform. Clean cut. Straight back. The kind of man who held doors for strangers and still said, "Yes, ma'am," without irony. And yet, he hadn't asked for anything. Not a refund. Not an upgrade. Not even recognition. He just wanted to keep his daughter close to the clouds. That night, Eleanor returned to her penthouse in Tribeca. Tall ceilings, Polished stone floors, a piano she never learned to play. Everything immaculate, everything silent. She poured herself a glass of Pinot Noir, stood by the window, and watched the city pulse below, like a giant organism alive but indifferent. She remembered the warmth in Sophie's voice, the trust in her eyes, when she handed Eleanor that apple. Not a bribe, not a plea, just kindness. She sat down on her ivory couch and opened her laptop. Then she opened a blank email and typed, "To Community, Initiatives, Skypeth Airlines." Subject Guest Advisor Proposal, Jack Reynolds. She paused, fingers hovering above the keyboard. Initiate outreach to Jack Reynolds for a guest advisory role in the SkyPath Veterans Integration Initiative. Coordinate travel and lodging. Discretion advised. She stared at the message. Was this professional interest a PR move? An impulsive act of gratitude? Or something else she couldn't name yet? She hit send, then closed the laptop. Somewhere in Colorado, Jack tucked Sophie into a borrowed bed, beneath a crocheted blanket that smelled of lavender and thyme. "Daddy," she murmured sleepily. "Did the airplane lady go home?" "Yeah, sweetheart," he said softly. "She probably went to a really big house, in a really tall building. Do you think—" She was sad. Jack paused. "Why do you ask that?" Sophie shrugged, her eyes already fluttering shut. She looked like she forgot how to smile. Jack sat quietly beside her until her breathing deepened into sleep. Then he turned off the lamp and stared into the dark. He didn't know who the woman was. But somehow, he had the feeling their story wasn't finished yet. The small cabin outside Boulder smelled like old pine-boiled tea leaves and the faintest trace of mothballs. Jack Reynolds had spent the better part of the morning fixing the squeaky floorboard by the front door, while Sophie drew horses and stars on the back of unopened cardboard boxes. Grandma June, technically his foster mom but family, in every way that mattered, was out for her weekly hair appointment. She'd left a casserole on the counter with a note. "Just heat it. Don't analyze it. And don't forget the mail." Jack chuckled when he read it. Same old June. He opened the mailbox and found a single envelope. No return address. Just his name typed in simple black font. He turned it over in his hands, frowning. Inside was a letter. "Dear Mr. Reynolds, we'd like to formally invite you to a private advisory session for the SkyPath Airlines Community Veterans Program. Your experience and insight as a military service member are valuable to our efforts. All travel and accommodations will be arranged on your behalf. Please contact the enclosed liaison for details. Respectfully, E.T. No title. No company header. No signature block. Just those two initials." Jack folded the letter slowly. It didn't take much imagination to guess who E.T. was. That evening after Sophie went to bed, Jack stood at the edge of the porch, looking out at the flat expanse of Colorado fields. A low fog was rolling in soft as breath. Crickets chirped in the distance like nature's metronome. He held the letter again this time with a sense of caution. He had no desire to be anybody's poster boy, especially not for a giant airline. He wasn't some soundbite in a veteran tribute video. He fixed broken HVAC units and did his best to raise a daughter with more warmth than the world had given him. Still, something in that woman's face, her stillness, her restraint had stayed with him. Not beauty in the conventional sense, but a kind of powerful solitude. She looked like someone who had stood in too many boardrooms, heard too many half-truths, and still walked out taller than everyone else. And yet, that one moment with Sophie had cracked something in her. Was that what this was about? Guilt-pity. He almost crumpled the letter and tossed it in the wood bin. But then he thought of Sophie, whispering. She looked like she forgot how to smile. 2 days later, Jack and Sophie boarded a flight to New York, this time knowingly in first class. The airline rep had smiled at them in that trained way that said, "We know who you are, sir, but we won't say it out loud. As they walked down the jet bridge, Sophie turned to him and said, "Daddy, do you think we'll see the fairy airplane lady again?" Jack shrugged, keeping his tone light. "I don't know, Peanut. Maybe she lives in the clouds." Sophie beamed. "Like Mommy." Jack stopped walking for half a breath, then nodded. "Yeah, kinda like that." The hotel was a 5-star skyscraper in Midtown. Too many mirrors, too much glass. Jack looked distinctly out of place in his olive canvas jacket and scuffed boots, but he stood tall as always. Sophie wore her best denim dress with her favorite purple sneakers. Their room overlooked Central Park. Sophie pressed her nose to the glass and whispered, "I didn't know trees could grow in cities." Jack laughed. "Only the brave ones." The next morning they were led into a private meeting room at the Skypath headquarters. Polished oak minimalist chairs and a floor-to-ceiling view of Manhattan's skyline. Eleanor was already waiting inside. This time, she stood to greet them. No assistants, no clipboard, just her. She extended her hand toward Jack. "Thank you for coming." Jack looked her in the eyes before taking it. "Still not sure why I did." Sophie tugged at his sleeve. "Hi, airplane lady." Eleanor knelt in heels and a suit in her power to be eye level with the girl. "Hi, Sophie," she said gently. "I kept your apple." Sophie lit up. It was a good one. "I picked it myself from a school trip. Mommy used to say red apples are for brave people." Eleanor blinked, and for a second, the ice in her voice melted. "I think she was right," she said. Jack watched the exchange quietly, unsure what surprised him more, that Eleanor remembered the apple, or that she kept it. They talked for an hour. Jack didn't sugarcoat his thoughts. He told her what was broken in the current outreach programs, how veterans didn't need pity. They needed jobs, purpose, a place to use their skills, without having to wear medals on their chest every time they applied for work. Eleanor listened. Really listened. Not in the way executives pretend to listen while waiting to interrupt. Then she said something unexpected. "What if I told you I want to create a program designed by people like you? Not people like me." Jack looked at her. "Why would you want that?" Eleanor's voice was quiet, almost unsure. "Because I think I've forgotten what it feels like to build something that matters." For a long moment, Jack didn't answer. But in that silence, something shifted. They weren't CEO and guest anymore. They were just two people broken in different ways trying to figure out how to start again. The rain began around 3 p.m., soft at first, tapping against the wide windows of Eleanor Tate's 47th floor office like a hesitant question. She rarely noticed weather. Her days ran on meetings, mergers, and market forecasts. But today, the sound seemed to ground her. On the sleek couch across from her desk sat a small bundle of denim sneakers and imagination Sophie Reynolds, drawing quietly on a Skypath-branded notepad with colored pencils someone in marketing had left behind. Jack stood nearby, arms crossed, loosely eyes alternating between the skyline and his daughter. Eleanor leaned against the edge of her desk, observing them both, not as a CEO, but as a woman unfamiliar with this kind of stillness. "I hope this isn't an inconvenience," she said, nodding toward Sophie. Jack shook his head. "Not at all. She likes quiet places with windows." Sophie didn't look up. "It's like being in a cloud treehouse," she murmured, tongue poking out as she shaded in what looked like a flying horse with wings made of apples. Eleanor smiled. A cloud treehouse. What a beautiful thing to believe in. The plan had been simple. Jack would meet with her team downstairs to review pilot ideas for the Veterans Program. It would take an hour, maybe 2. She'd offered to let Sophie wait in her office, assuming the child would get bored in 5 minutes. But an hour later, Sophie was still there, still drawing, still content. Not once did she complain, fidget, or ask for a screen. Eleanor found herself strangely, comforted. So Jack said, walking over and dropping into the chair across from her desk. "What made you want to do this?" She turned toward him. "Hire you," he chuckled. "Start this whole initiative. Veterans, community programs. Doesn't really seem like your corporate speed." Eleanor paused, choosing her words carefully. "People think I built this airline by being ruthless, but the truth is, I just outlasted everyone else." Jack studied her. "That doesn't answer the question." She took a breath, glanced at Sophie, then back to him. "When I was 9, she said quietly, my mother passed away. Cancer. Fast. Brutal. My father remarried almost immediately. His new wife sent me to boarding school before my 10th birthday. Said I was too emotional. So I learned not to be." She folded her arms, voice steady but low. "I spent years believing vulnerability was weakness, that being efficient was enough. But it's not. Not anymore." Jack leaned forward. "So you're trying to fix that now?" With this, Eleanor looked down. "I don't know if it can be fixed, but I think maybe it can be healed." He didn't speak for a while. The sound of Sophie's pencil filled the silence between them. Then he said something Eleanor didn't expect. "My daughter still talks to her mom." Her head tilted slightly. "She passed when Sophie was 5. Car accident. Quick like your mom, but different kind of brutal. Ever since she talks to her when she's scared. When she misses her. Sometimes. When she's happy." Eleanor's throat tightened. "And you?" Jack gave a soft, humorless smile. "I talk less. Fix things more." They were quiet again, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Outside, the rain grew heavier. Later that afternoon, as Jack walked Sophie toward the elevator to meet the community development team, Eleanor bent down to Sophie's level. "You're a very good artist," she said, nodding to the notepad the girl clutched to her chest. Sophie beamed. "I made you something." She opened the notebook, flipped to the last page and held it up. It was a picture of a tall woman in a gray coat, holding hands with a little girl in purple sneakers. Behind them was a plane, with a heart drawn on the wing. The caption underneath spelled out in careful crooked letters read, "Don't forget how to smile." Eleanor blinked hard, the sting behind her eyes coming faster than expected. She took the picture slowly, as if afraid it might vanish if she moved too quickly. "Thank you," she said. Sophie leaned in, her voice soft. "It's okay if it takes time. Smiles are shy sometimes." Then she skipped off down the hall. Eleanor remained kneeling for a moment longer than necessary. That evening, Jack stood outside their hotel suite's window, watching the city lights dance against the rain-soaked glass. Sophie was curled up on the bed, already drifting off to sleep. He held his phone screen glowing with an unsent message to Eleanor. "Thanks for earlier. I didn't expect it to be so human." He stared at it. Deleted the word human. Typed, "Thanks for letting Sophie stay with you today. She likes your windows." Sent. Across the city, Eleanor sat in her penthouse, still holding the drawing. She hadn't touched her dinner. The apple Sophie had given her was still in a small dish on the kitchen island. She placed the drawing in a clear plastic sleeve and tucked it into a file folder. Then she did something she hadn't done in years. She stood by the piano in her living room, lifted the cover, and pressed one key. It echoed softly through the apartment, low and warm. She smiled barely but honestly. Maybe smiles were shy. But maybe they just needed to hear music again. The diner smelled like coffee syrup and a hint of burnt toast, the kind of smell Jack hadn't realized he'd missed. Sophie sat across from him in a red vinyl booth, swinging her legs and humming along to a Christmas tune, playing from a dusty speaker above the pie case. "I want the pancake with the smiley face," she declared, pointing at the menu, "and bacon. Extra crispy. like Grandma June makes. Jack smiled, closing the menu. "You've got expensive taste, kid," she grinned. "You taught me to aim high." They had the morning off. Eleanor had scheduled the next Veterans Advisory session for later that afternoon. It was meant to be a brainstorming roundtable with her department heads, but Jack had already made up his mind. If it felt like a PR stunt, he was done. Still, he couldn't deny something had shifted. It wasn't just about the program. It was her. The way she spoke to Sophie without condescension. The way she listened, really listened to his ideas. The way she looked out at the world like someone who'd built a castle and only recently realized she was the only one living in it. Jack didn't like complications, but he wasn't blind either. There was something there, and it terrified him. Their waitress arrived cheerful and tired in equal measure. She scribbled their order on a napkin, then paused. You folks visiting? Jack nodded. Work trip. The waitress smiled at Sophie. New York's lucky to have you. She walked away. Jack glanced down at the table where Sophie was now doodling a sun in the corner of her kids' menu. His hand reached for the extra napkin on the side. He picked up the pen and, without thinking, wrote 3 words in small block letters. Thank you. Stay. He stared at it. The letters looked oddly heavy. Just then his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He let it ring. A moment later, a text came through. Meeting time moved to 4 p.m. Ms. Tate requests your input on the outreach model before presentation. Jack slipped the phone into his pocket and looked again at the napkin. He folded it once, then slid it into his coat. Eleanor sat at the head of the long conference table her team gathered with digital tablets and coffee cups. Most were young, sharp, over-polished. She respected their efficiency, even if she barely knew their birthdays. Jack walked in 5 minutes early, wearing the same worn coat, Sophie by his side. A few people exchanged glances, probably wondering why a kid was in the meeting. Eleanor didn't flinch. She stays, she said simply. And that was that. The meeting began. Eleanor opened the floor, but let Jack lead. He didn't use slides. No bullet points. Just stories. He talked about the men and women he'd served with, the ones who came home whole and the ones who didn't. The mechanic who couldn't find work because his resume said, combat zone. The mother of 2 who fixed aircraft wings with surgical precision, but couldn't get hired at a civilian repair shop. They don't need parades, Jack said. They need places to be useful. Dignity isn't given. It's earned and kept when people trust you to show up and do something real. Silence followed. A few people shifted uncomfortably. Then someone asked, "But what makes our airline the right platform for?" That Jack met the question head on. Because planes don't fly without hands. And those hands don't have to wear suits. Eleanor watched him with quiet intensity. She saw it in the way he spoke, not to impress, not to inspire. Just truthfully. When the meeting ended, she stood and nodded to him. Walk with me. They moved down a quieter hallway toward the rooftop lounge, a place executives used for media interviews and holiday parties. Today, it was empty. The glass walls revealed a skyline dusted with soft clouds, the city below blanketed in gray and gold. I'm impressed, Eleanor said, pausing near the edge. Your voice carries further than you think. Jack leaned on the railing, arms crossed. Didn't come here to impress. She nodded. That's why it worked. They stood in silence for a while, watching a small plane arc across the sky. Sophie had wandered over to a cushioned bench and was now drawing with markers Eleanor's assistant had discreetly provided. You should stay longer, Eleanor said suddenly. Jack looked at her. She kept her eyes on the clouds. There's more we could do. More I want your help with. There's no rush to leave. He studied her carefully. This about the program. Her gaze dropped to the ground far below. Not entirely. Jack didn't speak. She turned toward him then for once without armor. You're not like most people I work with. You don't hide behind language. You don't sell yourself. You just are. He gave a half smile. I fix things, Ms. Tate. I'm not complicated. That's exactly what makes this complicated, she said softly. Jack looked away, hands tightening on the rail. I have a daughter, he said, voice low. She's the only piece I have left of my wife. I make decisions slow. I don't do cities well. And I don't get close unless I know someone's going to stay. Eleanor didn't respond right away. Then gently she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded napkin, the one he'd left on her office desk 2 days earlier, after a meeting, not realizing she'd seen it. She unfolded it. His words were still there. Thank you. Stay. Jack stared, startled. You didn't throw it away, she said. That says more than you think. She handed it back. He didn't take it. Instead, he looked at her, really looked, and said, I'll think about it. Then turned to check on Sophie. Eleanor stood alone holding the napkin. And for the first time, maybe ever, she hoped someone would decide to stay, not because they needed her, but because they wanted to. The Skypath Community Innovation Lab wasn't glamorous. Tucked into the old maintenance wing of the company's Midtown campus, it still smelled faintly of machine oil and old paper. But Jack liked it. No glass walls, no buzzwords, just an open room with tables, whiteboards, and enough space to roll up your sleeves. He leaned over a blueprint sketch sleeves rolled to the elbow, outlining a veteran's retraining model with permanent placement pipelines. Behind him, a few Skypath staffers were taking notes, including a young program officer named Deshawn, who had served in the Navy and wore his lanyard like a badge of honor. Sophie sat in the corner, focused on building a jet out of Legos. The airline had converted part of the lab into a child-friendly zone just for her. That small gesture hadn't gone unnoticed. Jack was finishing a sentence about post-service technical skills when he noticed Eleanor at the door, observing quietly. You're early, he said. Nodding in greeting, she smiled. You're efficient, he gestured to the team. They're sharp. They've been listening, not just nodding. That's rare. I handpicked them, she said, stepping into the room. Most of them are children of veterans, or veterans themselves. Jack raised an eyebrow. Didn't think you were sentimental. Eleanor paused, choosing her words. I'm not. But I believe in designing systems that remember the people they serve. He watched her for a beat, then nodded. That's the best kind of leadership. After the session wrapped, Eleanor invited Jack and Sophie up to her private lounge on the 45th floor, not the corporate one, but the quiet room she had furnished herself. No boardroom chairs, just an oversized couch, a wall of books, and 2 lounge chairs facing the city skyline. Sophie darted to the bookshelf like a homing pigeon. She reads everything Jack said, watching his daughter flip through a thick hardcover. Even stuff she doesn't understand. She likes the sound of words. Eleanor poured 2 cups of coffee from a French press. She reminds me of someone I used to be. Jack accepted the cup. You. Eleanor nodded. When I was little, I wanted to be a teacher. I used to pretend the boardroom table at my stepmother's house was a classroom. I taught books to chairs. Jack chuckled. That's kind of beautiful. Lonely, but beautiful. She looked down into her cup. It was the only space I had where no one interrupted me. There was a pause. Jack let it sit. Then Eleanor said, I want to make this permanent. The Veterans Program. Not just a campaign or an initiative, a division. A real arm of Skypath. Jack blinked. That's a big move. I want you to lead it, she said plainly. He sat back. Eleanor, I'm not a suit. I don't speak corporate. You speak honestly. That's what this needs. She leaned forward. We'll build the language around you, not the other way around. Jack looked over at Sophie, now showing a picture book to Eleanor's executive assistant, who had joined her on the floor, like a kind aunt. He returned his gaze to Eleanor. "I'd have to stay in New York. You'd have to stay," she echoed. Another silence passed, this one heavier. "You don't do this often, do you?" Jack said gently. Eleanor tilted her head. "Do what invite people in." Her smile was small but honest. "No. I learned to be very good at keeping people out." Jack's voice was low. "Why change that now?" She met his eyes. "Because when your daughter handed me an apple, she wasn't trying to break a wall. She just saw someone who forgot how to smile." Jack looked down, blinking slowly. "She gets that from her mom." "She gets that from you," Eleanor replied. That evening, back at the hotel, Jack stood on the balcony, the night breeze brushing his face. Sophie was inside asleep with her arm curled around a stuffed bear the concierge had surprised her with. He held the contract Eleanor had given him. It wasn't flashy, just a few pages of initial terms and vision statements. But it was real. A job. A future. A place to build something again. He didn't sign it. Not yet. But he didn't throw it away either. The next day, Eleanor invited them on a private tour of Skypath's aircraft restoration hangar in Queens, an old warehouse where vintage planes were being rebuilt by retired engineers and volunteers. Sophie's eyes widened as she walked under the belly of a 1960s Silverbird. "Is this what angels ride?" she asked, awestruck. Eleanor smiled. "Maybe the brave ones." Jack ran a hand along the riveted paneling. "This one's still got life in it." "Like you," Eleanor said softly. He turned to her. She didn't look away. On the ride back to Manhattan, Sophie sat between them in the back of the town car, dozing off as the city lights flickered past the window. Eleanor spoke without turning her head. "I don't know where this is going, but I know I don't want it to end on a runway." Jack looked at her, voice steady. "Neither do I." She finally turned to him. "Then let's see how far this plane can go." And in that quiet, rolling moment somewhere between cloud and ground, they both realized they weren't just designing a program anymore. They were designing a life. The boardroom was colder than usual. Eleanor Tate sat at the head of the polished table, hands folded, spine straight. 12 directors flanked both sides, each armed with tablets, quarterly reports, and the kind of practiced smiles that always accompanied confrontation. She recognized the rhythm. First came the pleasantries, then the concerns, then the dagger. It was Richard Alden, the lead investor, who delivered it. 60, silver-haired with a Harvard MBA and the emotional range of a spreadsheet. "We admire your passion," he said, carefully enunciating the word like it tasted foreign in his mouth. "But we're concerned about the optics of expanding non-core community programs, especially ones led by individuals with no corporate experience." He didn't say Jack's name, but he didn't have to. Eleanor let the silence hang, unwilling to blink first. Another board member added, "You've always been lauded for discipline, Eleanor. But lately, your judgment seems colored, personal." She met his gaze. "If by personal, you mean taking veterans off the street and putting them into careers that actually matter, then yes, it's personal." Richard leaned forward. "We're in the middle of a merger with International Aero Group. If we look too soft, too experimental, we risk leverage. Investors want predictability, not sentiment." She tilted her head. "Do they want headlines about turning their backs on servicemen and women? Because I can guarantee the press will frame it that way." Murmurs moved across the room like a wave. One woman raised a brow. "Are you threatening the board?" Eleanor's voice remained calm. "I'm defending my vision." They stared at her, calculating. She knew that look. The look people gave when they started wondering if you were still worth betting on. After the meeting, Eleanor stepped into the executive restroom and locked the door. Her reflection stared back from the mirror, composed, flawless, distant. The same woman she'd cultivated for 20 years. But something had cracked underneath. She gripped the edge of the sink, knuckles white. The words played again in her head. Your judgment seems colored, as if that were a weakness, as if caring was a liability. She opened her purse, reached for a compact, but instead pulled out the folded drawing Sophie had given her. The caption at the bottom, written in crooked crayon letters, read, "Don't forget how to smile." Her throat closed. And then, quietly, Eleanor Tate, CEO of one of the largest airlines in North America, cried. No sobs, no theatrics, just silent tears slipping down her face like something she'd forgotten how to release. That night she didn't go home. She went back to the Skypath lab. It was after hours. Empty. Quiet. But the lights were still on. Jack was there, alone. He was reviewing a list of applicants for the pilot phase of the program, pencil behind his ear, coffee half drunk beside him. He looked up as she entered. "You okay?" he asked, instantly standing. She froze. No one had asked her that in years. Not without agenda. Not like that. She nodded, but too slowly. Jack walked over and stood in front of her. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He just waited. That was the thing about Jack Reynolds. He didn't push. He didn't fill silence with noise. He just left room for truth. Finally, she spoke. "The board thinks I've lost objectivity." He raised an eyebrow. "Because you care." "They don't say it that way," she replied bitterly. Jack's jaw tightened. They'd rather trust a spreadsheet than a gut instinct. That's why so many companies fail at doing real good. They forget people aren't numbers. Eleanor leaned against the table. "I don't know how to fight this. If the merger goes south, I'm the scapegoat. If it succeeds, they'll take credit and gut every program that doesn't turn a profit in Q3. Jack nodded slowly. "So fight it differently." She looked at him. "How let the results speak," he said simply. "You asked me to lead this because I don't do corporate. Let me do what I know. Build something that actually works. You focus on surviving the politics. I'll give them something they can't ignore." Eleanor felt a weight lift, not completely, but enough. "You still believe in this?" she asked. Jack met her eyes. "I believe in you." The room stilled. She hadn't heard that in years. Not in that tone. Not from someone who meant it. She whispered, "I don't want to lose this." "You won't," he said. And she believed him. Across the city, Sophie lay in the hotel bed, her stuffed bear tucked under one arm, a paper airplane on the nightstand. In her sleep, she murmured, "Sky, cloud, smile." And in that moment, as the city breathed below, and two people stood together in a room full of quiet resolve, something intangible took flight. Not an aircraft, not a headline, but a hope. The kind that doesn't show up on spreadsheets. The kind that lives between people. The kind that stays. Snow had arrived in upstate New York earlier than expected. Outside the small lodge Jack had chosen for the weekend, Veterans Retreat, snowflakes drifted like feathers, softening the edges of the world. Inside the fireplace crackled, casting golden light over wool blankets, thermoses of cocoa, and the smell of pine and cinnamon. Eleanor Tate sat on a worn leather couch, not a designer one, just simple and warm, and for the first time in decades, her blazer had been replaced by a thick sweater. Her boots were off, her phone was off, and her walls were down. Across the room, Jack was crouched beside Sophie, helping her line up tiny paper bags filled with sand and tea lights along the lodge's windowsills. "Daddy, are we lighting wishes again tonight?" Sophie asked, eyes shining. "You bet," Jack said. "Every bag holds one." Sophie looked over at Eleanor. "Do grown-ups still make wishes?" Eleanor paused, surprised by the question. Jack smiled. "Only the smart ones." Sophie trotted over, holding out a small white paper bag. Here, this one's for you." Eleanor took it, stunned by the delicate trust in those small fingers. "Thank you," she said, her voice quiet. "What will you wish for?" Sophie asked. Eleanor looked out the frosted window, then back at the girl who, without trying, had cracked open something she thought was lost forever. "I think I'll wish for something I used to be afraid of," she said softly. Sophie blinked. Like a spider, Eleanor laughed, a real laugh, light and surprised. "No, something scarier." Later that evening, dinner was simple chili in ceramic bowls, warm cornbread, and stories passed between veterans and volunteers like sacred heirlooms. Eleanor sat next to Jack, their elbows nearly touching. She listened more than she spoke, absorbing every detail. One retired Air Force mechanic told a story about fixing a cargo plane with chewing gum in Iraq. Another described the silence of the desert and how hard it was to come home to noise. Every tale was honest, sometimes hilarious, sometimes heartbreaking. When someone asked Jack why he had agreed to run the Skypath program, he simply said, "Because the person who asked didn't pretend to know everything. She just listened." Eleanor felt the words settle deep in her chest. After dinner, Sophie tugged Eleanor's sleeve. "I have something for you," she whispered. From her small backpack, she pulled out a pair of hand-knitted socks, thick, a little lopsided, and unmistakably made with love. Purple with gold stars stitched in uneven lines. Eleanor took them as if they were made of glass. "You made these," Sophie nodded proudly. "I practiced a long time. Grandma June taught me. She says cold feet make cold hearts. But I think warm socks make smiles." Jack, standing nearby, chuckled. "She's got theories." Eleanor stared at the socks. For a woman who had once signed contracts worth hundreds of millions, this might have been the most valuable thing she'd ever been given. She didn't say thank you, not yet. She just sat down on the couch and slipped them on. They were too big. They were perfect. The stars came out late, clear against a coal-black sky. Jack and Eleanor stood side by side just outside the lodge entrance, Sophie asleep inside her paper bag lantern glowing on the windowsill. They each held a warm mug, breath misting in the crisp air. "Thank you for coming," Jack said after a while. "I didn't come for a meeting," Eleanor replied. "I know." She turned to him. "That's a first." Jack looked down, smiling. "You're not the woman I thought you were on that flight." She tilted her head. "And who did you think I was? Someone who wouldn't let a kid stay in her seat. Someone who'd see two tired people and only see a mistake." He met her eyes. "But you didn't. And ever since then, you've been proving me wrong." Eleanor looked up at the stars. "Jack, I've built my life around control, around plans, precision forecasts. There was safety in knowing everything. But lately," her voice trailed off. Jack finished for her. "Lately, life's been happening anyway." She nodded. He hesitated, then asked, "And how does that feel?" She didn't answer. Instead, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out something small, a folded scrap of notebook paper. She handed it to him. He opened it. It was a child's drawing, Sophie's, one he hadn't seen before. It showed 3 stick figures, a girl with braids, a tall man, and a woman with yellow stars on her socks. All 3 were holding hands in front of a heart-shaped airplane. Underneath, in Sophie's uneven handwriting, "My forever flight crew." Jack felt something shift inside him, not dramatic, not overwhelming, just real. Like a plane changing altitude, steady and sure. He looked at Eleanor. Her eyes shimmered, but she didn't cry. She didn't need to. I think he said quietly, "We're all learning how to fly again." Inside, Sophie stirred in her sleep, murmuring something about marshmallow clouds. Outside, 2 people stood in the snow, warm socks on cold ground hearts just beginning to thaw. And above them, the sky stretched wide open, forgiving and full of stars. Eleanor Tate didn't notice the snow melting as she stepped off the private jet back into New York. The retreat had ended only hours earlier, but the contrast between the quiet warmth of the lodge and the cold edge of the city felt jarring, even violent. She tugged her coat tighter. Something in the air had shifted, and not in the weather. Alan, her longtime driver, waited at the tarmac. As she approached, he gave her a tight-lipped nod and opened the door. No small talk. No welcome back. Not like usual. She frowned but said nothing. The car ride was silent until Alan handed her an envelope. "From legal," he said quietly. They requested it be delivered directly. She opened it on her lap. Her eyes scanned the words once, then again, and again. Then the world seemed to tilt. Effective immediately, SkyPath's board has voted to suspend Eleanor Tate as acting CEO, pending internal review. Allegations misuse of discretionary funds, unauthorized restructuring, and failure to disclose personal conflicts of interest. Temporary oversight transferred to Executive Vice Chair Richard Alden. The car turned down Lexington Avenue, but Eleanor's thoughts were far from the city grid. The words blurred into each other, but 3 lines burned into her mind. Misuse of funds the Veterans Program. Unauthorized restructuring the new community branch. Personal conflicts. Jack. It was a setup, clean, surgical, and no doubt planned for weeks. Her phone buzzed, vibrating with messages from press shareholders and colleagues, some frantic, some cautious, some already calculating her obituary in the business world. But Eleanor wasn't thinking of them. She was thinking of him, of Sophie, of how fragile everything real suddenly felt. At the hotel, Jack noticed something was wrong before Eleanor even spoke. She stood in the doorway of their lounge with her coat still on her posture, to still her eyes. Different. "Eleanor," he asked, voice low. She handed him the letter. He read it once, jaw tightening with each word. When he looked up, his eyes were full of disbelief. "They're accusing you of stealing, of using company resources for personal relationships, of restructuring without board approval, of compromising SkyPath's brand." Her voice was calm, but it had the brittle tone of someone walking across thin ice, afraid even her breath might break it. Jack exhaled. "This is about the Veterans Program, about us." "They think I've gone rogue," she said, "because you tried to do something decent." "No," her voice cracked, "because I stopped playing their game." She moved to the window, watching snow wash down the glass in long, tired streaks. "I knew the risks. I knew Richard hated this direction, but I thought if I built something that worked, they'd let it stand." Jack stepped closer. "And now, they want to kill it before it roots." He clenched his fists. "What do you need from me?" Eleanor turned to him, eyes sharp, almost pained. "I need you to tell me something, and I need you to be honest." Jack nodded slowly. "If this burns," she said, "if this costs me everything, will you still be here?" Silence, not hesitation, just the weight of the question. Jack looked down, then back up. "I didn't ask for this, for headlines, for media glare. I didn't want Sophie in boardrooms or school halls with whispers about her dad and some airline scandal." Eleanor's face fell, but he continued, voice steady. "I didn't come into this for comfort. I came because something in you woke up something in me, and I want to see where that goes, even if it's not easy." She didn't speak. She couldn't. Instead, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out Sophie's drawing, now worn at the corners, and pressed it into his palm. "My forever flight crew," she whispered. The next day, Eleanor held a press conference, not in the SkyPath Tower, not behind marble or chrome, but in the Veterans Community Lab surrounded by people who didn't care about shareholder returns, but showed up anyway. She stood without makeup, without corporate armor, just a simple blouse and truth in her voice. "I'm not here to defend my position," she said to the cameras. "I'm here to defend a principle that profit and purpose can coexist, that an airline should fly not just people but hope." Reporters leaned in, some skeptical, some moved. She continued, "If this costs me my title, so be it. But I will not apologize for investing in people who gave everything and asked for nothing." Behind her, Jack stood beside Sophie. No words, just presence. And sometimes that was the loudest loyalty of all. That night, the board met in private. Richard Alden pushed hard for termination. But not everyone followed. In fact, several shareholders pushed back, citing the viral impact of Eleanor's speech public support for the Veterans Initiative and rising brand trust online. The decision was tabled. Eleanor would remain under review but not yet removed, a temporary stalemate. But momentum was changing. Back at the hotel, Eleanor sat on the edge of the sofa, tired but clear-eyed. Jack brought her tea, then sat beside her. Sophie was asleep again, clutching the purple star socks Eleanor had worn every night since the retreat. "You don't have to thank me," Jack said. She looked at him. "I wasn't going to," she replied. He laughed softly. Then, after a moment, she asked, "What would you have done if they'd fired me today?" Jack shrugged. "Helped you start your own airline." Eleanor smiled. With what money, he tapped his chest. Good intentions and elbow grease. "And what would we call it?" Jack thought for a second. Then he smiled. Skyheart. The Monday morning air inside Skypath's Manhattan Tower felt thinner than usual. Quiet. Braced. News crews still hovered near the entrance. Employees walked a little faster, glanced a little longer. Eleanor Tate felt it all, but didn't flinch. She stood in the elevator, hands at her sides, a simple navy dress in place of her usual suit. No jewelry, no entourage, just Jack beside her, silent and steady. "I don't want you in that room," she said softly as the floors ticked upward. Jack met her eyes. Too late. Sophie wasn't with them. She was back at the hotel with June, who had flown in unexpectedly the night before, with lemon cookies knitting needles, and a look that said, "Try to tell me not to come." The elevator dinged. Eleanor stepped into the boardroom like a soldier stepping onto a runway. The room was packed. Every seat at the long oval table was filled. Screens glowed. Lawyers lined the back wall. Richard Alden was already seated, legs crossed, watching her with the calm of a man convinced the final play had been made. He gestured toward the only empty seat. "Ms. Tate." "I'll stand," Eleanor replied. Richard gave a shrug, then cleared his throat. "We're prepared to move forward with the vote." Actually interrupted a new voice from the doorway. "I believe you're missing some context." Heads turned. A woman entered the room. Tall, poised, dark suit white blouse. Behind her trailed 3 men in veterans' uniforms, and a 4th man carrying a canvas bag filled with thick binders. Richard straightened. "Excuse me, this is a closed session, I'm aware," the woman said coolly. "But Skypath's bylaws permit a shareholder representative to speak prior to a dismissal vote if the board decision materially impacts public equity. I represent Vanguard Group." Eleanor blinked. Vanguard, the airline's 2nd largest institutional shareholder. The woman continued. "Our firm has received hundreds of letters in the past week. Not from hedge funds, not from CEOs, from families, students, veterans, churches, travelers, all stating that they now choose Skypath, not because of pricing, but because of purpose." She gestured toward the veterans behind her. "These gentlemen are part of the new Skypath Community Aviation Fellowship, a program with 0 attrition, 0 write-offs, and a growing wait list of over 200 qualified applicants." She turned to Eleanor. "Ms. Tate, we were unaware this program had been initiated. But since its creation, your stock trustworthiness index has risen 9% in 7 days. The press you earned, not manufactured, organic, national." She faced the board again. "Terminate Eleanor Tate, and you terminate that trust. And we withdraw our support." Silence. Complete. Richard's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. The woman looked at Eleanor one more time. Sometimes a brand isn't saved by its numbers, but by its soul. And then she walked out. The room remained frozen until Eleanor spoke, her voice quiet. "Well, I believe that concludes the context." A few members chuckled. Richard didn't. Someone cleared their throat. "Shall we move to vote?" But no one raised a hand. Not this time. An hour later, Eleanor stepped out of the boardroom with her title intact. More importantly, her mission intact. Jack stood waiting. He didn't ask. She didn't explain. She simply exhaled and rested her forehead gently against his chest, like a door that had finally found its frame. That evening, the Skypath lab was full. Reporters had gone. Pressure had lifted. The space now buzzed with something simpler, purer. Laughter. Sophie sat on the floor, building cardboard planes with 2 new fellows, both veterans recently enrolled in the expanded program. Eleanor watched from a distance, hands around a mug of mint tea. Jack came to stand beside her, his expression warm, but knowing. "You know they'll try again," he said. "I know," she replied. But this time he added, "You've got more than a title behind you." She smiled. "I've got socks with stars on them." Jack laughed softly, then turned serious. "You didn't just save your job today, Eleanor. You gave people a reason to believe in the kind of company they want to build their lives around." She nodded slowly. "Funny," she said, voice thoughtful. "I spent years trying to keep myself separate. From the people, the risk, the mess." And now Jack asked. She looked out at Sophie, laughing, flying her cardboard jet in slow loops through the air. "I think the mess is where the miracles are." Later that night, in the quiet of their hotel suite, Eleanor sat on the couch, flipping through a binder of new applicant profiles. She wasn't working. She was dreaming. Jack walked in from the balcony where he'd just hung up a call from his old commanding officer who'd offered to volunteer. He set his phone down and studied her. "You're different," he said. She looked up. "Different, how your eyes don't look like you're trying to outrun something." Eleanor closed the binder and leaned back. Maybe she said, "I'm finally flying towards something." Jack crossed the room and sat beside her, knees touching. "You know what I wish?" he asked. She raised an eyebrow. "What, that? The seat you gave up on that plane was always meant for you." Eleanor tilted her head. And what seat was? That he smiled. "Next to me." The Skypath community celebration wasn't flashy. There were no red carpets, no reporters, just people. Veterans, mechanics, single mothers, quiet heroes, and the ones who believed in them. Eleanor had insisted it be held in the converted hangar in Queens. Jack had added, "Make sure there's real food." So there were long folding tables filled with chili cornbread apple pie and homemade root beer. Kids darted between adults. Music from an old jukebox played Sam Cooke and Ella Fitzgerald. The air smelled like hope. Sophie wore a purple dress with little silver stars and a matching clip in her braid. She was unusually quiet, not shy, just focused. She had a secret. Eleanor had noticed it earlier when Sophie had disappeared into the break room with a shoebox and 2 markers. Jack had shrugged. She gets that look when she's building something. Eleanor had smiled, already curious. Now, as the evening reached its golden hour, Sophie stood on a low platform near the front of the room. She held the box in her hands like it was a treasure chest. Someone dimmed the overhead lights. Jack and Eleanor sat side by side in the front row. Sophie cleared her throat voice, small but steady. I made something, she said, and it's not perfect. But it's from my heart. For someone who gave me a seat. The room hushed. Eleanor sat straighter. Sophie opened the box and carefully lifted out a hand-built airplane made entirely from cardboard, ribbon, glitter, and glue. A little crooked, slightly lopsided, but beautiful. On the side in marker were the words, "Sky Heart 1 gasps rippled through the room. Sophie turned to Eleanor. This plane is for you, because you flew with your heart. Not just your job. She turned to Jack. And this seat. She pointed to the open cockpit is for you, because you hold the sky up for people even when you don't know it. Jack blinked fast. Sophie smiled wider. I don't know if grown-ups get adopted, but if they do, I'd like to keep both of you. Forever. A stillness took hold, not silence, but reverence. Even the jukebox had gone quiet. Eleanor placed her hand gently over her chest. Jack reached out and took Sophie's hand. Then slowly he looked at Eleanor. I think she just said what we've both been trying not to. Eleanor nodded, voice a whisper. She always flies ahead of us. Later that night, after most had gone home, and only soft jazz hummed from the speakers, Eleanor stood beside the aircraft display case, now housing Skyheart 1. Sophie was asleep in Jack's arms, her brayed loose cheeks flushed from joy. Eleanor reached out and touched the plexiglass cover gently. I spent years earning miles, she said quietly. But this is the first real arrival. Jack smiled. Funny how a seat mix-up can change everything. She turned to him. No, you changed everything. You and her. He looked down at Sophie. I thought I was all she needed. You were, Eleanor said. But now she has more, and so do you. A long pause. Then Eleanor stepped closer. I'm not asking for guarantees. I know enough to know life doesn't give those. Jack nodded. But if we build something slowly, intentionally, the way you build everything, I'd like to be part of it. Jack searched her face. Then, with a rare tenderness, he whispered, You already are. The three of them stepped outside together. Snow had started to fall again, soft and slow, like feathers drifting through moonlight. Sophie stirred half awake and mumbled, Are we flying? Jack kissed her hair. Not yet. Eleanor looked up at the sky. No, she murmured. But we're getting close. The Skypath atrium had never looked like this before. Gone were the sterile lights and glassy, emotionless fixtures of a typical corporate launch. In their place bloomed warmth, hanging lights shaped like paper airplanes, soft brass music drifting through the air, and walls aligned with photographs, not of planes, but of people. Veterans, engineers, technicians, families. Real people. Real stories. Eleanor stood backstage in a soft charcoal dress, her heels uncharacteristically low. Her hair was loose over her shoulders, lips painted with quiet confidence. Tonight was not about profits, not about spin. It was about roots. Jack stood beside her, adjusting Sophie's dress. She wore white tights, a navy blue jumper with golden buttons, and a yellow ribbon in her braid. She fidgeted, glancing at her dad. Are there a lot of people out there? She whispered. Jack crouched his hand steady on her shoulders. Yep, a whole sea of them. Her eyes widened. What if I forget the words? He smiled. Then just speak from your heart. That's what got us here anyway. Eleanor knelt beside them, surprising herself. You don't need to be perfect, Sophie, she said gently. You just need to be real. And that's something you're better at than any of us. Sophie nodded, her chin lifting ever so slightly. When Eleanor walked on stage, first applause filled the atrium, not thunderous, not forced, but genuine. The kind of applause that says, We've seen you. We trust you. She spoke briefly. clearly. She thanked the board, the veterans, the families, the staff. Then she said, "But the person who taught me most about flight didn't wear a uniform or hold a title. She was 8 years old. She asked for the sky not for herself, but for her mother. And in doing so, gave me something I'd long forgotten direction." She turned toward the wings. "And so with great joy, I ask you to welcome SkyPath's very first Community Honorary Ambassador, Sophie Reynolds." Sophie stepped onto the stage, small but certain. There was a pause and then a standing ovation. Some clapped for the charm, others for the symbolism. But those who had been paying attention clapped because they knew this little girl was the spark that rerouted them all. Sophie stepped up to the mic. "Hi," she said simply. The crowd quieted. "When I met Miss Eleanor, I didn't know who she was. I just knew she looked sad." Light laughter. She gave me a seat. "My dad says people don't forget that kind of thing." A hush. Then she built this place, and now other people get seats too. She paused, eyes scanning the crowd. "I think that's what flying really means. Not just going up, but helping someone else lift off too." The applause that followed wasn't loud. It was long, sustained, heartfelt. Jack's eyes glistened. Eleanor blinked quickly and took Sophie's hand. "You stole the show," she whispered. Sophie beamed. "I was aiming for the sky." Later that night, the three of them walked through the now empty atrium, dimly lit quiet, echoing with the memory of applause. Sophie skipped ahead, clutching the little gold wing pin they'd given her. Jack and Eleanor trailed behind, side by side. "She handled that better than most executives I've met," Eleanor said. "She's braver than both of us," Jack replied. They reached the far window wall, a vast pane of glass overlooking the city's sprawl. It was dark now, the sky inky blue freckled with the early stars of spring. Eleanor looked out. "It's strange," she said. "This used to be the view I stared at when I felt powerful. Now, it just makes me feel small." Jack nodded. "In the best way, I hope." She turned to him. "Yeah, in the best way." For a long moment there were no words, just the hum of late-night lights, the slow quiet of a building, exhaling after an important day. Then Eleanor spoke. "I never planned for any of this." Jack smiled. "Neither did I. I had a map," she continued. "Every stop, every layover, every landing point. And then one day, you and your daughter sat in the wrong seat." He stepped closer, or maybe the right one. Their eyes met. No fireworks, no swelling music, just warmth, recognition, and a peace that only comes when two wandering souls finally stop walking. Eleanor reached up and touched the side of Jack's face gently, like checking if he was really there. Then finally she leaned in and kissed him. Not the kind of kiss that demands, but the kind that invites. The kind that says, "I see you. I trust you. Let's take this flight together." Behind them, through the glass, a single plane lifted into the skylights, blinking against the stars. Sophie's voice drifted up sleepily from the other side of the atrium, where she had curled up on a couch. "Are we flying yet?" Jack smiled without looking away from Eleanor. He whispered, "Almost." Spring arrived late in Boulder that year. The snow had melted, but the ground still held the scent of memory, earthy fresh, a little hesitant. The mountains in the distance were dusted with white, like forgotten thoughts, slowly softening at the edges. At the edge of town, in a quiet, renovated barn-turned community hub, a sign hung from an arched wood beam, Sky Heart Center built by hands that remember. Inside, laughter echoed down the long hallway, where veterans taught high school students how to repair turbines. A local mother ran a job board at the front desk. In the back, a sunlit classroom held workshops on welding parenting after deployment, and twice a month, creative writing for widowed fathers. Eleanor Tate stood in the main lobby with a clipboard and a cardigan tied around her shoulders. She was no longer CEO, at least not in title. She'd stepped down 6 weeks earlier, not in defeat, but by choice, by freedom. "I want to be where the people are," she'd said at the final press conference, "and where my heart's already been seated." Now, instead of boardrooms, she walked hallways. Instead of market trends, she read grant proposals. Instead of mergers, she coordinated playground builds and local food deliveries. And she smiled a lot. Sophie bounced down the hallway in a pair of worn sneakers and a faded Skyheart crew hoodie. In her arms was a clipboard, and behind her trailed a class of third graders from the local school. "And this is the engine model my dad helped build," she announced proudly. "And that's Miss Eleanor, who owns the building but shares the coffee machine." The kids laughed. Eleanor offered a wave mock stern. "Only when you've finished your worksheets." Jack leaned against the doorway, watching it all with quiet contentment. He wore a simple denim shirt, sleeves rolled hands, still calloused from fixing boilers at night and teaching in the shop by day. He had traded his old uniform for something softer, but he still stood like a man who'd learned how to protect what mattered. He joined Eleanor at the front desk. "She's turning into a bit of a tyrant," he said, gesturing towards Sophie. "She's 8, Eleanor replied. "It's peak tyranny season." They laughed. Outside, the wind rustled the budding trees. Birds moved in pairs across the blue sky. The world didn't feel perfect. It just felt honest. Later that afternoon, the three of them walked down to the small airstrip that bordered the edge of the Skyheart property. It had been Eleanor's idea, turning the retired strip into a place of wonder, as Sophie had named it. They laid out a picnic blanket near the runway. Sophie set out sandwiches wrapped in cloth napkins and apple slices shaped like stars. Eleanor looked up as a plane passed far overhead, silent and gleaming. Sophie followed its path with her finger. "I still think the clouds are where the brave people live," she said thoughtfully. Jack smiled. "And I think the brave ones are the people who stay grounded when others are flying away." Eleanor leaned back on her hands. Maybe they're the same. Sophie chewed her sandwich, then suddenly perked up. "Did you know today is our anniversary?" Jack blinked. "Of what?" "Of sitting in the wrong seat." Eleanor laughed. "That was today." Sophie nodded proudly. "I checked the boarding pass. I kept it." She reached into her backpack and pulled out a wrinkled stub protected in a plastic sleeve. Jack took it slowly. 1A. First class. Eleanor stared at the date, then at Jack. Her voice softer now. "I didn't know it then. But that was the moment everything changed." He nodded. "I didn't either. I just thought, maybe we'd get a warm towel and a window seat." They both chuckled. Then silence settled in, not awkward, but full. Like the quiet that comes right before takeoff. As the sun dipped low, casting the field in gold, Sophie lay back on the blanket hands behind her head, eyes on the clouds. Jack turned to Eleanor. "I was thinking," he began. She raised a brow. "That's dangerous." "I know. But maybe it's time to change the last seat we haven't changed yet." She frowned, confused. He pulled something small from his shirt pocket, a simple silver band, polished, but unadorned. She stared. He said nothing. She didn't need him to. Tears welled in her eyes, unspoken but certain. She nodded. And that was their engagement. No audience, no stage, just them. The girl who looked up, the man who looked forward, and the woman who finally looked inward and found home. They sat there until dusk, three silhouettes beneath a sky that had once separated them, now wrapping them in quiet light. A gust of wind rolled past, brushing their hair and lifting Sophie's paper plane off the picnic blanket. It soared high, circling once, then landed softly in Eleanor's lap. She picked it up, smiling. On the wing in Sophie's handwriting were 4 words: "First class is a family." We'd love to know. Where are you watching from today? Let us know in the comments. It's always beautiful to see how far these stories travel. And if this story touched your heart, consider subscribing to the channel. Not for numbers, but so you'll be here the next time we tell a story that just might stay with you. Thank you for spending time with us. Take care of yourself. And until next time, may you always find the seat you didn't know you needed.